To the staff at Mercy Central, Maya was a problem. A silent, trembling nurse they mocked for 3 months because she wouldn't meet Dr. Vance's eyes during morning rounds. They mistook her shaking hands for incompetence, never suspecting those same hands had once sutured torn arteries in Afghanistan while mortar fire shook the mountains. They ridiculed the mouse, completely unaware she was a legend among Navy SEALs. The mockery died the moment a Blackhawk helicopter descended on the parking lot, carrying the military who had come to demand their legendary operator back. The fluorescent lights at Mercy Central Hospital in Chicago hummed with that familiar headache-inducing frequency that only night shift workers truly understood. It was 2:13 a.m., the witching hour when caffeine lost its grip and patients wore dangerously thin. Maya Sterling stood at the nurse's station, meticulously organizing patient charts with the kind of obsessive precision that made people uncomfortable. She was 34, though the silver streaks threading through her tight bun and the deep lines around her eyes made her look older. Her dark skin bore the faint ghost of a tan that had never fully faded, a remnant of years under unforgiving desert suns. She moved with deliberate slowness, keeping her head down, shoulders perpetually hunched as if bracing for impact. "Check out the ghost," whispered Angela, the charge nurse, leaning against the counter with theatrical disdain. She gestured with her chin toward Maya. "I swear I dropped a tray yesterday 5 feet from her, and she flinched like a mortar went off. How did HR even clear her? She's a liability." Dr. Julian Vance, the arrogant chief resident who walked the halls like he owned the building, laughed while signing discharge papers. "She's a diversity hire or a pity case, Ang. Has to be. I asked her for hemostats during trauma intake last night, and she just stared at the instrument tray for 5 seconds before moving." 5 seconds. In my OR, 5 seconds is a lifetime. Maya heard them. She always heard them. Her hearing had been honed in environments where the scrape of boots on gravel could mean an ambush, where the metallic click of a rifle safety switching off was the difference between life and extraction in a body bag. But she said nothing. She simply tightened her grip on the clipboard, her knuckles lightening against her dark skin until the bones showed through. She wasn't just quiet. She was aggressively submissive. She took the worst shifts without complaint, the holidays, the overnights that destroyed sleep and relationships. She cleaned up bodily fluids that orderlies ignored. She let Dr. Vance berate her for errors she hadn't made. She absorbed it all with the same blank expression she'd worn when senior officers screamed during Hell Week. She had transferred here from a VA hospital in Cleveland with a redacted personnel file that Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator, had only glanced at before hiring her. Budget constraints and staffing shortages made questions inconvenient. To everyone else at Mercy Central, Maya Sterling was a washed-up, anxious burnout who probably couldn't hack it in a real emergency room. Sterling. The name meant nothing to them. But in certain corners of the Department of Defense, in classified briefings held beneath the Pentagon, that name was spoken with reverence. Lieutenant Commander Maya Sterling, Naval Special Warfare Group 2, combat medic attached to SEAL Team 6, call sign Valkyrie. The woman who had performed a thoracotomy in a sandstorm with a headlamp and prayer. The medic who had talked a terrified teammate through a field amputation while pinned down by Taliban fighters, her own leg shattered. But that woman was dead. Maya had buried her along with the 23 operators she couldn't save, the faces that visited every night at 300. Now she was just Maya. Invisible. Forgettable. Safe. At least she thought she was. Until the automatic doors burst open and a gurney exploded into the trauma bay. Paramedics shouting vital signs that made her spine stiffen with muscle memory she'd tried to forget. Dr. Vance appeared instantly, white coat billowing. He thrived in these moments, the chaos, the audience, the opportunity to demonstrate brilliance. Maya melted into the background, hands already reaching for supply cabinets, knowing exactly what would be needed. 2-liter bolus, wide open, Vance commanded. And someone get me a competent nurse. Sterling, you're just standing there. Think like a doctor for once. The words hung in the fluorescent air like a challenge. Maya's fingers tightened around the IV bag. Every eye in the trauma bay turned toward her, waiting for her to flinch, to apologize, to disappear. Dr. Vance smirked, already turning away, secure in his dominance. He had no idea he just dared a woman who had commanded operating rooms in Kandahar while rockets screamed overhead. The patient was a construction worker named Ellis, 43, married, father of 2. The kind of man who packed lunch pails and worked overtime to afford piano lessons. Maya saw everything in 3 seconds. The uneven chest rise, the distended jugular vein pulsing against his neck, the blue-gray tint creeping across his lips. His left lung was collapsing, air trapped in the pleural space, pressure building with every failed breath. Dr. Vance barely glanced at the monitor. Probable rib fracture from seatbelt compression. Get him stable and send him to imaging. We've got 6 more incoming. Maya's hand moved toward the instrument tray, then stopped. Her training screamed at her. Tension pneumothorax, minutes until cardiac arrest, needle decompression required immediately. But her survival instinct, the one that had kept her invisible for 3 months, whispered a different command. Stay quiet, stay safe. Let someone else carry the weight. Doctor, she said softly, the word barely escaping her throat. His trachea is deviating. JVD is pronounced. I think we should... You think? Vance spun toward her, eyes blazing with the kind of rage that came from being questioned in front of an audience. You're a nurse, Sterling. You don't think. You follow orders. Now get out of my trauma bay before I have security remove you. The other nurses exchanged knowing glances. Angela smirked. A resident whispered something that made another laugh. Maya felt heat crawl up her neck, shame mixing with something older and far more dangerous. The muscle memory of command, of making life or death calls when hesitation meant body bags. She stepped back, lowered her eyes, swallowed the words that could save Ellis's life. This was what she had chosen: invisibility over action, safety over duty. The ghost of who she used to be screamed inside her skull, but Maya had learned to silence ghosts. 20 minutes later, a teenage girl arrived with crush injuries. Maya assisted while Vance worked critical cases. She charted vitals with mechanical precision despite the tremor building in her chest. The girl's mother clutched her arm, begging for reassurance Maya couldn't give. Throughout the night, Maya noticed things others missed. A medication dosage error. She quietly corrected the chart. An EKG showing ST elevation that a resident dismissed. She flagged it for review, uncredited. A pediatric patient with internal bleeding. She prepared the OR before anyone asked. Dr. Valkyrie. Vance moved through the chaos like a conductor, all performance and velocity. He barked orders that sounded confident but lacked precision. Speed over accuracy. Optics over outcomes. When patients stabilized, he accepted praise with practiced humility. When complications arose, he found subordinates to blame. By 4 a.m., Maya's scrubs were stained with blood that wasn't hers. Her lower back ached from hours of standing, and her hands had started their familiar tremor, the one that only appeared when her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. She stood at the scrub sink, watching rust-colored water spiral down the drain, and thought about Ellis. He'd been intubated an hour ago when his oxygen plummeted. Vance had finally ordered the X-ray confirming what Maya knew immediately. Tension, pneumothorax. The collapsed lung would have been caught if anyone had listened to the trembling nurse. Maya dried her hands with deliberate slowness. Ellis would survive, probably. But he'd suffered an extra hour of oxygen deprivation because she had chosen silence. The faces of 23 operators she'd lost flickered through her mind. Men who died despite her best efforts, not because she'd stood silent. She was pulling off her gloves when Angela appeared beside her, voice dripping with false concern. "Dr. Vance wants to see you in his office. Something about tonight's performance." The smile didn't reach her eyes. Maya's stomach tightened, but she nodded and followed, her footsteps echoing in the fluorescent corridor. Dr. Vance sat behind his desk, tie loosened. He didn't invite her to sit. "I've been reviewing your file, Sterling. VA transfer. Redacted sections, PTSD diagnosis. I'm shocked HR cleared you for emergency medicine." Maya said nothing. Interrogation resistance training had taught her the power of silence. "You question my judgment tonight. In front of staff, residents I'm teaching. That insubordination undermines the chain of command keeping this ER functional." The irony wasn't lost on Maya. Chain of command. She'd operated in actual chains of command where mistakes meant flag-draped coffins and midnight notifications. This man had no idea. "I'm recommending immediate suspension, pending a full psychiatric evaluation," Vance said, sliding a form across the desk. "Sign this acknowledging receipt, and security will escort you out. Consider yourself lucky I'm not pursuing formal charges for creating an unsafe environment." Maya stared at the form. Her medical license. Her purpose. The thin thread connecting her to something beyond the nightmares and guilt. All of it balanced on whether she reached for that pen. Before she could move, the overhead speakers crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. Mass casualty alert. Multi-vehicle pileup on I-90. Estimated 20-plus casualties en route. All available staff report to emergency intake immediately." Dr. Vance's jaw tightened. The form sat unsigned on the desk between them as the hospital around them shifted into crisis mode. The ER transformed into controlled chaos within minutes. Sirens wailed in overlapping waves as ambulances disgorged patients onto gurneys. The air thickened with the copper smell of blood, diesel exhaust, and the sharper edge of fear that even experienced nurses couldn't suppress. Maya moved before thought. The suspension form lay forgotten as she followed Vance into the maelstrom. Her hands knew what to do. Triage protocols embedded so deep they were automatic. Red tags, yellow tags. The terrible arithmetic where you save the most lives, not the loudest screams. The construction worker arrived at 4:47 a.m. Rodriguez, mid-50s, barrel-chested, built for hard labor. His right leg was mangled, bone visible through torn denim. But that wasn't what made Maya's breath catch. It was his breathing. Rapid, shallow, uneven. His neck veins were distended like cables under skin. His trachea was deviating to the right. Subtle but visible if you knew what to look for. The left side of his chest wasn't moving properly. His lips were the color of old bruises. Tension pneumothorax. Again. Except this time. Rodriguez had maybe 3 minutes before his heart stopped. Maybe less. Dr. Vance swept into Trauma Bay 3 like a storm system, residents trailing in his wake. He assessed Rodriguez with the same cursory glance he'd given Ellis hours earlier. Crush injury to lower extremity. Get him typed and crossed for 6 units. Prep for emergency surgery. Move. Maya's internal clock was already running. 180 seconds. Maybe less. Rodriguez's oxygen saturation was dropping, 92%, 89%, 86%. The monitor's alarm screamed what everyone was too rushed to notice. She looked at Vance, willing him to see what she saw, willing him to be the doctor he claimed to be. He was already moving to the next patient, 120 seconds. Maya's hands were already moving toward the supply cabinet. Her training had taken over, bypassing the 3 years of deliberate helplessness she'd cultivated. This was the moment. Step forward and be seen, or step back and watch another man die because she'd chosen safety over duty. Rodriguez gasped, his eyes going wide with the unique terror of suffocation. His hand clawed at his chest. The monitor flatlined for 2 seconds before his heart remembered to beat. Maya's hands found the 14-gauge needle before her mind registered the decision. She crossed the room in 3 strides, her body remembering what her civilian persona had tried to forget. A resident stepped into her path. She moved him aside with one hand, not roughly, but with the kind of certainty that made him stumble backward. "Sterling, what the hell?" Vance started. "Tension pneumothorax," Maya said. Her voice was different now, flat, cold, surgical. "Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Stand back." Vance lunged forward, hand reaching for her wrist. Maya caught his forearm mid-motion. Her grip was iron. Her eyes, when they met his, held something that made him freeze. Not anger, but the absolute certainty of someone who had made this exact call in situations where hesitation meant death. "Don't," she said simply. She released him and drove the needle between Rodriguez's ribs with surgical precision. The trapped air hissed out violently. Rodriguez sucked in a breath so deep it sounded like resurrection. The trauma bay went silent. Not the quiet of calm, but the stunned vacuum that follows a grenade blast. Every eye turned to Maya. The monitor stabilized, oxygen saturation climbing back toward normal, heart rate settling into a steady rhythm that suggested life instead of imminent death. Rodriguez was breathing. Actually breathing. Rodriguez's color returned slowly, the blue-gray fading from his lips like storm clouds clearing. His breathing evened, his eyes focused. He was going to live. Maya stepped back, her shoulders rounding again, her posture collapsing back into the submissive hunch she'd worn for 3 months. The needle clattered into the disposal bin. She lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, doctor. I panicked. I shouldn't have. That was incredible," a resident whispered. Angela stared, mouth half open. Another nurse's hand trembled as she adjusted an IV line. They had just witnessed something that didn't fit into their understanding of who Maya Sterling was supposed to be. Dr. Vance's face had gone from pale to crimson. His hands shook, not with fear, but with humiliation so profound it bordered on rage. He had been shown up in front of his residents, his staff, everyone he needed to maintain authority over. And it had been done by the broken, trembling nurse he'd been about to fire. The nurse who had just saved a life he'd missed. "You just assaulted a patient," Vance said, his voice shaking. "You performed a procedure without authorization. You physically grabbed a supervising physician." He turned to security, who had materialized near the doorway during the chaos. "Remove her from this hospital. Immediately. She's done." Maya didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply nodded once and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the fluorescent silence. Behind her, Rodriguez was breathing. That was enough. It had to be. She saved a life and was punished for it. But what the staff doesn't know yet is that removing Maya Sterling might be the worst mistake Mercy Central ever made. If you want to see what happens when the military comes looking for their missing operator, hit that subscribe button now. Because what's coming next will change everything. Security escorted Maya through the ER like she was a criminal. 2 guards flanked her, hands hovering near their belts with the casual readiness of men who expected resistance. She gave them none. She walked with her head down, shoulders rounded, the same invisible posture she'd perfected over 3 months of deliberate anonymity. Nurses whispered as she passed. Residents stared. A janitor who had always smiled at her looked away. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the same brittle frequency they always had. Indifferent to her humiliation, Maya focused on putting one foot in front of the other, her breathing controlled, her face blank. The locker room was empty at this hour, the day shift not yet arrived, and the night shift still drowning in the mass casualty aftermath. Maya sat on the wooden bench, her hands resting on her knees, and stared at the dented metal locker that had held her civilian life for 3 months. The nameplate read Sterling M. Nothing more. No rank, no call sign. Just a name that meant nothing to anyone here. She peeled off the blood-stained scrubs, with methodical slowness, folding them despite knowing they'd go straight to biohazard disposal. Old habits. Military precision. The kind of discipline that didn't fade just because you stopped wearing the uniform. Her hands didn't shake. They never shook when she was actually doing something, only in the empty spaces between action and consequence. Her civilian clothes were plain: jeans, a gray hoodie, running shoes worn at the edges, the uniform of someone trying not to be noticed. She dressed slowly, her body moving with the exhausted efficiency of someone who had been awake for 22 hours and felt every single one of them in her bones. From the inner pocket of her bag, her fingers found cold metal. She pulled out the dog tag slowly, like handling something sacred and profane at the same time. The chain was tarnished, the tags themselves scratched and dented from years of wear. She held them up to the fluorescent light, reading words she had memorized long ago. Sterling, Maya J. LT CDR USN 04. Naval Special Warfare, oppose no pref. The tags felt heavier than they should, not from their physical weight, but from everything they represented. Kandahar, Helmand Province, the Hindu Kush. Raids where she'd worked by headlamp and instinct, her hands buried in chest cavities while gunfire rattled overhead. Operators who had trusted her with their lives. 23 who hadn't made it home despite everything she'd done. She could still see their faces. Martinez, who joked about his daughter's quinceañera while she'd packed his wounds. Chen, who died holding her hand, whispering about a wife who'd never know his last words. Thompson, 19 years old, crying for his mother as his blood pressure dropped and Maya ran out of solutions. She'd left the Navy not because of cowardice, but because of exhaustion. The kind that went deeper than physical fatigue, down into the marrow of who she was. Every life saved was a temporary victory against an enemy that always won eventually. Every loss was a personal failure, no matter what the after-action reports said. She'd saved hundreds. She remembered the 23. Mercy Central was supposed to be different. Civilian medicine, predictable injuries, no mortars, no ambushes, no operators bleeding out in her hands while she screamed for a medevac that was still 15 minutes out. She'd traded her identity for anonymity, her competence for invisibility. It should have been enough. But tonight, watching Ellis struggle to breathe while she stayed silent, then watching Rodriguez nearly die because Vance's ego mattered more than protocol, she'd realized something devastating. Invisibility wasn't peace. It was just a different kind of cowardice. She'd survived the war only to lose herself in the aftermath. Maya slipped the dog tags back into her bag and zipped it closed. She would leave nursing, find something else, anything that didn't require her to choose between her safety and someone else's life. Maybe retail, maybe nothing. It didn't matter. She was done being the person everyone else needed her to be. She was slinging her bag over her shoulder when she felt it, a low, unfamiliar vibration trembling through the walls. At first, she thought it was her imagination, the kind of phantom sensation that came from too little sleep and too much adrenaline. But then the ceiling tiles rattled. The lights flickered. The vibration grew into a deep mechanical thrum that she recognized instantly. Rotor wash, heavy, military grade, getting closer. Maya's bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor. She stood frozen as the sound grew deafening, as windows began to shake and car alarms started screaming in the parking lot. Through the small locker room window, she saw it descending, a matte black MH-60M Blackhawk, the kind that didn't appear on civilian airspace for social calls. The kind that only showed up when the United States military had come to collect something that belonged to them. And Maya knew, with the sick certainty of someone whose past had just caught up with her present, exactly what they had come for. The Blackhawk touched down with precision, born from thousands of hostile insertions. Rotor wash scattered debris, flipped furniture, set off every car alarm within 100 yards. The hospital's automatic doors shuddered under the pressure. Before the skid settled, operators poured out. 6 of them, multicam fatigues, plate carriers loaded, rifles angled down but ready. They moved with fluid economy, no wasted motion, each man covering a sector with practiced precision. Inside the ER, chaos of a different kind erupted. Nurses stumbled backward from windows. A security guard reached for his radio with shaking hands. Patients stared in disbelief. Dr. Vance, still in his blood-stained white coat, stormed toward the entrance with a kind of indignant fury that only came from someone who had never actually faced real danger. "This is a hospital," he shouted, pushing through the automatic doors. "You can't just land a military helicopter on private property. I'm calling." The lead operator didn't break stride. He shoulder-checked Vance aside with the casual efficiency of someone moving furniture. Vance stumbled, caught himself against the wall, his face cycling through shock, rage, and finally the cold realization of fear as he processed the kind of men standing before him. These weren't hospital security. These weren't even regular military. These were predators in human form. The lead operator was massive, 6'4", 240, muscle and scar tissue. Face weathered by sun and combat, eyes like steel, presence filling the ER like a physical force. He swept the room with a tactical assessment that missed nothing. "Where is Valkyrie?" His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence. The ER staff stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Angela's mouth opened and closed, wordlessly. A resident looked around as if expecting someone else to answer. The name meant nothing to them. It was just another call sign in a world they didn't understand. Dr. Vance pushed away from the wall, ego overriding survival instinct. "There's no one here by that name, and you have no authority." "Lieutenant Commander Maya Sterling," the operator said louder now. "Naval Special Warfare. Where is she?" The name hit the staff like a shockwave. Eyes widened, heads turned. Maya Sterling, the trembling nurse they'd mocked for 3 months, the liability HR should never have hired. The woman Dr. Vance had just fired for saving a life. "Lieutenant Commander?" Angela whispered, the color draining from her face. "Stand down." "Tank." Maya emerged from the hallway in civilian clothes, bag slung over her shoulder, looking like she was about to walk out of the building and never come back. But her voice, that was different. No tremor, no hesitation. The flat command tone of someone who had given orders in situations where disobedience meant death. The massive operator turned, and something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, but a recognition that went deeper than friendship. Relief mixed with respect. "Ma'am," he said, and the deference in his voice made it clear this wasn't courtesy, it was earned. "Master Chief Garrison," Maya said, her voice steady. "I'm out. You know I'm out." "Tex is dying," Tank said simply. No preamble, no explanation. Just the kind of direct communication that happened between people who had operated together in places where words were a luxury. Fragment lodged near his aorta. Experimental ordnance, magnetic trigger. Civilian surgeons can't touch it without killing him. Maya's jaw tightened. Tex. Staff Sergeant Marcus Tex Reeves. The kid from Houston who'd covered her during a hot extraction. Who'd taken a bullet meant for her and laughed because the plate caught it. Who'd sent whiskey when she left with a note. "Anytime you need an exit, call." "I can't," she said quietly. "I'm done with that life. Find someone else." "There is no one else." Tank stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "The fragment is designed to detonate if standard surgical instruments get within 6 inches. Titanium tools only. Steady hands. Someone who's worked trauma under fire. You're the only combat medic who's extracted live ordnance from a human body and kept them breathing. We both know it." Maya closed her eyes. She could walk away. She could let them find another solution, another medic, another miracle. She could protect the fragile piece she'd built from the wreckage of her military career. Or she could do the one thing she'd sworn she'd never do again. Step back into the fire and risk everything she'd fought to leave behind. Behind her, the ER staff watched in stunned silence. Dr. Vance's face had gone pale. Angela looked like she might be sick. They were seeing something they'd never imagined, the mouse revealing she'd been a lion all along. "Where is he?" Maya asked. "Trauma Bay 1. We've secured the room. Your instruments are ready." Maya dropped her bag and turned back toward the ER. But she wasn't the hunched, trembling nurse anymore. Her shoulders were back, her spine was straight, her eyes were clear and hard. When she spoke, every person in that building understood for the first time who Maya Sterling actually was. "Clear Trauma Bay 1. I want titanium instruments, biohazard containment, and everyone except essential personnel out. Now." She paused at the entrance, glancing back at Tank. "And someone get Dr. Vance out of my operating theater before I have him removed." Trauma Bay 1 had been transformed. Clear plastic sheeting-covered walls. Armed guards stood outside, rifles ready. Titanium instruments gleamed under surgical lights, arranged with military precision. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reeves lay sedated on the table. His chest bare except for scars mapping a career of survived violence. The new wound was clean, entry below his left clavicle. But inside, buried 3 inches deep and kissing his aorta, was a magnetic-triggered fragmentary device designed to turn a soldier into a weapon. One slip and he'd die. Or worse, he'd explode. Maya scrubbed in with ritualistic precision from muscle memory. Hot water, antiseptic, 3 minutes of methodical cleaning that gave her brain time to shift fully into the mode she'd abandoned 3 years ago. When she looked up from the sink, the woman reflected in the window wasn't the trembling nurse Mercy Central had mocked. It was Lieutenant Commander Sterling. Call sign Valkyrie. The woman who had never lost a patient on the operating table when it mattered most. She entered the bay, and everything changed. Her posture, her voice, the way she held herself. Tank and 2 other operators stood ready, along with a Navy trauma surgeon flown in specifically to assist. They all looked to her, and in that moment, there was no question who was in command. This was her operating theater, her patient, her call. "Status," Maya said, her voice flat and cold. The Navy surgeon stepped forward. "Fragment is titanium composite, approximately 2 centimeters in length. Magnetic sensor will trigger detonation if it detects ferrous metals within 6 inches. Current position is 0.3 millimeters from the aortic wall. Heart rate elevated but stable. We have titanium retractors, scalpels, and forceps. No margin for error." Maya moved to the table, her eyes scanning Tex's vitals on the monitor. Pulse, 98. Blood pressure, 138/86. Oxygen saturation, 97%. He was stable. But stability meant nothing once she started cutting. One slip, one wrong movement, and the fragment would shift into the aorta. Or worse, it would detonate. "Valkyrie?" Tex's voice was rough, morphine slurred but conscious. "That really you?" "It's me," Maya said, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. "You called in that favor." "Didn't mean it like this." He tried to smile. "Thought maybe you'd help me move or something." "I'm getting you out of here, Tex. Just like Helmand. Just like always." She looked at the anesthesiologist. "Put him under. Full sedation. I don't want him feeling this." The room went silent except for monitors beeping. Maya made the first incision with a titanium scalpel, hand steady as stone. Blood welled and was suctioned away. She worked with focused intensity. No hospital, no guards, no past. Only anatomy and precision. "Retractor." The Navy surgeon placed the instrument in her hand. She deepened the incision, spreading tissue with careful pressure. The fragment came into view, a dark metal sliver embedded in swollen tissue. "Aorta is visible," the surgeon said quietly. "Fragment is touching the arterial wall." Maya could see the pulsing aorta now, the red vessel carrying blood from Tex's heart to his brain. The fragment was nestled against it like a coiled viper. One wrong move and the vessel would rupture, or the magnetic trigger would activate and the fragment would detonate, killing everyone in the room and destroying half the trauma wing. Forceps. Her breathing slowed. Heart rate dropped. This was the zone, the place where time stretched and nothing existed except the task at hand. She'd been here before, in sandstorms and firefights, with men dying and no backup. This was just another extraction, just another life to save, just another impossible promise to keep. The titanium forceps closed around the fragment with microscopic precision. Tissue resisted. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Someone dabbed it away. On 3, 1, 2, 3. She pulled with controlled pressure, angling from the aorta. The fragment resisted, then shifted. Blood welled. The monitor screamed. "Bleeding," the surgeon said. Maya's free hand applied pressure while the forceps maintained grip. Halfway out. Not good enough. It had to come out completely. One more pull. Steady. Controlled. The fragment came free with a sound like tearing fabric. Maya lifted it clear, forceps at arm's length. Everyone held their breath. "Clear." Tank moved, taking the forceps. He crossed to a blast-resistant container, sealed it. 30 seconds to safe distance, he said, disappearing through the door. Maya worked to control bleeding, sutures, pressure, cauterization. Tex's heart rate stabilized. Someone counted 20, 15, 10. Silence. Held breath anticipation. Maya's hands didn't stop. If the fragment detonated, they'd never know. Instant, catastrophic, final. The explosion came from outside, distant thunder rattling windows, setting off alarms across 3 blocks. The container had done its job. Inside, monitors beeped steadily. Tex was breathing. Maya stepped back from the table, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the adrenaline was fading. The Navy surgeon finished closing while she stripped off her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bin. Tex's vitals were strong. He would live. Against every odd, against experimental ordnance and impossible geometry, he would live. He opened his eyes as the sedation lightened, focusing on Maya with the kind of clarity that came from staring at death and walking away. "Valkyrie," he whispered. His hand reached for hers. "Told you. Anytime, anywhere." And Maya, standing in a room full of operators who knew exactly who she was and what she'd just done, felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Pride. She just saved a life that no civilian surgeon could touch, and proved she's still the best in the world. But the real question is, what happens when the truth about Maya Sterling goes public? Subscribe now, because what happens next will deliver justice that Dr. Vance will never see coming. Tex was moved to recovery under armed guard, stable but weak. Maya had just finished scrubbing out when Tank appeared with 2 men in civilian suits who radiated federal authority. Department of Defense. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. "Lieutenant Commander Sterling," the lead agent said, "we need to discuss what happened here today, and what happens next." "I saved a life," Maya said flatly. "That's what happened. As for what happens next, I'm walking out of here and never coming back." Before the agent could respond, Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator, burst into the hallway with Dr. Vance trailing behind him. Henderson's face was red, his suit disheveled. "Ms. Sterling has been terminated. She performed unauthorized procedures, assaulted a physician, and created a hostile. Shut your mouth." The voice came from the recovery room. Tex appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but with absolute determination. He was shirtless, except for bandages, IV line still in his arm, dragging the IV pole with him. Tank moved to help him, but Tex waved him off. "I got this." He crossed the hallway until he stood directly in front of Dr. Vance. The difference in physical presence was stark. Tex, even wounded, was a trained killer covered in scars. Vance was a bureaucrat who had never faced actual violence. "You the one who fired her?" Tex asked. Yes. She violated hospital protocol. She assaulted me. She performed procedures without... She saved Rodriguez's life tonight, and Ellis's. You know who Ellis is? Construction worker, 43 years old. You missed his tension pneumothorax, and she caught it. Then you fired her for being right." Tex stepped closer. "You know who I am?" No. "You're a patient. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reeves, 5th Special Forces Group. I've served in 11 combat deployments across 4 countries. I've been shot 6 times, blown up twice, and stabbed once. And 3 hours ago, I had experimental ordnance lodged next to my aorta that no surgeon in this country could touch except one." He pointed at Maya. Her. Lieutenant Commander Maya Sterling, the best combat medic in the history of naval special warfare. Valkyrie. And you fired her. The hallway had gone silent. Nurses who'd been passing stopped to listen. Security guards stood frozen. Everyone was staring at Maya, seeing her for the first time as something other than the trembling woman they'd dismissed. The federal agent cleared his throat. "Mr. Henderson, Dr. Vance, I'm Special Agent Matthews, DOD. What Staff Sergeant Reeves isn't telling you is that Lieutenant Commander Sterling prevented a national security incident tonight. That fragment was classified ordnance. Its detonation would have killed 50 people and shut down Mercy Central permanently. Henderson's face went from red to white. We didn't know. You didn't know because her record is classified. What you should have known is that when you hire someone with a redacted file, you don't fire them for saving lives. Matthews turned to Vance. I've been reviewing footage. You missed 2 critical diagnoses Sterling caught. You humiliated her, threatened her job, and physically tried to prevent life-saving treatment. Vance's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. His carefully constructed authority was disintegrating in real time. Around him, the staff who had laughed at Maya's expense were very carefully looking anywhere else. Matthews turned back to Maya. The Navy wants you back. Full reinstatement. Promotion to commander. Lead position at the Special Operations Medical Training Center. You'd be teaching the next generation of combat medics. No deployments, unless you request them. Maya stood silent, processing. 3 years ago, she'd left because the weight of the dead had become unbearable. She'd chosen invisibility because visibility meant responsibility. But tonight, she'd remembered something she'd forgotten. Saving lives wasn't just about carrying the weight of those you lost. It was about honoring them by saving the ones you could. No, Maya said. Tank's eyebrows rose. Matthews looked surprised. Tex smiled like he'd expected this. I'll take the teaching position. I'll train medics. I'll consult on complex cases. But I'm done with war. I'm done watching kids die in places they can't pronounce for reasons they don't understand. She looked at Tex. I'll keep you alive. All of you. But I do it my way, on my terms, and I never deploy again. Matthews nodded slowly. The Navy can work with that. Maya turned to Dr. Vance. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but every word landed like a hammer. You're a small man playing doctor in a world where real doctors save lives despite people like you. You mistook my silence for weakness, my restraint for incompetence. You'll never make that mistake again. She turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, Henderson was already on his phone, panic clear in his voice. Vance stood alone in the hallway, his authority shattered, his career likely over. The nurses who had mocked Maya wouldn't meet each other's eyes. Tank caught up with her at the door. The Blackhawks fueled up. We can take you anywhere you want to go. Maya looked back one last time at Mercy Central Hospital. The place that had broken her down for 3 months. The place where she'd finally remembered who she was. Take me to Coronado, she said. I've got work to do. As the Blackhawk lifted into the dawn sky, Maya fastened her dog tags around her neck for the first time in 3 years. The mouse was gone. The legend remained. And somewhere in the trauma bay below, Rodriguez and Ellis were breathing because she'd chosen duty over fear. Valkyrie was home. From mock nurse to legendary operator, Maya Sterling proved that true strength isn't about being loud. It's about being lethal when it counts. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories like this where the underdog becomes the unstoppable force, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for staying until the end. If Maya's story hit you the way it should have, subscribe now. We've got more legends waiting. Drop a comment with your favorite moment, and I'll see you in the next one. Until next time.